Hey everyone, my name is Ross Miner. I'm totally blind and welcome to my accessibility review of the PlayStation Access Controller. Before we begin, of course, huge shout out to PlayStation for providing the controller. Very, very generous of them. And I know I'm not the intended demographic for this controller. I'm only blind, don't have any other disabilities, but I still thought it'd be really, really cool to review. I've really been getting into accessible hardware, especially after I visited the Inclusive Tech Lab up at Microsoft in Redmond. And so I was really excited to get my hands on one of these controllers. So even though it's not specifically for me, I do think that I can bring value in testing whether or not it's blind accessible, because, you know, people can have mobility impairments and blind impairments or visual impairments. So I just felt like that was important to discuss. Lastly, this is my review. I'm just going to be kind of covering how the controller works and how it plays and the setup process. But if you want to look at all the parts and the hardware itself, you can check out my unboxing video here. But without further ado, let's dive into the review. So to start, the PlayStation Access Controller retails at $90 MSRP in the United States, which all in all, I think is really affordable. The original DualSense PS5 controller is $70, so it's only $20 more. And if anyone knows anything about any sort of adaptive or accessible hardware, it can go up into the hundreds, even thousands sometimes. So for the controller itself, there are 10 programmable buttons I'm holding up right now. Hopefully you guys can see that. And then on the back, there are screw holes. There are 1024 screw holes and then 1/4 screw holes. So that's really great to have a bit of variety there. And then there is also a rubber non-slip backing, which I can confirm works very well. Then on the side of the device, there are 4 3.5 jacks for additional accessories, as well as a USB-C port. And then lastly, there is a joystick on it. First thing you'll notice is that, yeah, there's only one joystick, but something really cool about this controller is that it can be paired simultaneously with another access controller, which could give you double the buttons and another joystick to mess around with. But you can also pair it to a DualSense controller. And I think this is really important because anyone who has a PS5 or PS4 will already have this controller, so they don't need to buy an additional accessory. All of the buttons on the controller as well are completely swappable. This includes the joystick, and again, all of the buttons except for the big button in the middle. I don't think that can be swapped, but there are a bunch of different button shapes that come with the controller. I won't show them all right here, but there are a lot to suit your needs, in my opinion. In terms of setting up the controller, it was honestly completely accessible. First of all, completely accessible with a screen reader, and it was painless. I had absolutely no issues whatsoever. It just brought me through the entire setup process. And a really cool thing that I loved is that, and this was actually something I was worried about, is how do I know which button is which? Because that's really important, especially for blind gamers who are new to gaming. If they pick up a controller, they're not going to know which button is which. And thankfully, when I plugged in the controller, it read which button and it told you where it was as well. It told you how to orient the controller, and it told you kind of where the buttons were in relation to the big button, which I think was a really good way to orient a blind player, or any player, of course, to this controller. While setting it up, you'll notice that I had the stick on the right side, and honestly, I don't know why I did this, because every single controller has sticks on the left side. So I don't know. I mean, controllers have sticks on the right side, so I don't know where my head was. But the thing is that as soon as you plug in the controller and start the setup process, it tells you about orientations and the different orientations you can have. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, I could just flip the controller over and this is how it should be, which was, yeah, just really, really nice to know. Next, it showed me the setup process for the profiles on the controller. And again, this is all seamless. You can assign almost every action to different buttons, as well as assigning simultaneous actions to a single button, which I thought was really, really cool. However, notice how I said you can assign almost every action to these buttons, and that's because I could not figure out a way to assign a swipe on the touchpad. So you can assign the option button, you can assign the PlayStation button, the share button, all of that, even the touchscreen button. But as far as swiping, I could not figure that out. And so I do really hope that's added in a future update, because I mean, even in a game like The Last of Us, you can use it to check your health. which, you know, is very important when playing that game. Lastly, something that I almost did was I almost completed and exited my profile without assigning some critical buttons like the option button. And the cool thing is that when I went to back out, the setup process was like, whoa, you're not going to be able to use your PlayStation if you continue with this profile. And that was really helpful, because would I have soft locked myself out of my PlayStation if I continued using the controller like that? Probably. There is one issue that I have with the way profiles are implemented, or actually two. First being that you can only have 3 profiles, and I feel like this is almost an artificial limitation, because how difficult could it be to set up more? I'm not a programmer on the PlayStation or anything like that, but to me, it just seems like this artificially limits how many profiles you can have, and subsequently how many games you can play comfortably, at least. Next, this isn't so much of an issue, I don't think, but the profiles are stored on the PlayStation. I think it'd be cool somehow if in future generations or updates, the access controller could store profiles on the controller itself, because then you could plug it into a different PS5 and not have to set all of that up again, because that can definitely be difficult. But speaking of setting up profiles again, there is actually a copy profile button. So let's say you have your first profile and you just want to tweak it a little bit into a second profile. Well, instead of reassigning every single button, you can copy it over and then change the specific button that you want. And now that brings us to gameplay. Online, it says that this controller has an acclimation period of 7 to 10 days. This is really common for assistive devices to have an acclimation period, whether it's a cane, even an iPhone. It takes time to learn these things. However, I played The Last of Us Part 1 with this game, or with this controller, and I mean, within 30 seconds, I was shooting enemies. Obviously not with extreme accuracy or precision, but I was able to get a couple of kills, so I think that was great. I also didn't take a ton of time getting the best profile for The Last of Us. I kind of just threw something together, and again, even then, I was able to get a couple kills. Something I was curious about is what other operating systems or consoles does this controller work on? I didn't test it on the Xbox because I kind of assumed by default it wouldn't work. However, I do have some unfortunate news in that I tested on PC and I could not get it to work, at least with games that say they have PS5 controller support or DualSense support. All right, so it's late at night, and long story short, I have gotten the Access controller to work on one game on Steam. So the majority of games don't work with it, but you may get lucky. So keep that in mind. Next, I also tried it on iOS/Apple TV, and I wasn't even able to connect it via Bluetooth. This is interesting because the Xbox adaptive controller can connect to iOS and Apple TV and iPad OS. So I really do hope that this is brought in a future update. However, just for full transparency, I wasn't able to get the controller to connect on iOS, and then I didn't even try on TV OS because I kind of just assumed the same. If you go on Apple's website, they say, oh, you can connect the controller to all these platforms. So I kind of assume if it's not able to connect on one, it won't be able to connect on the rest. Lastly, I want to compare this controller to the Xbox adaptive controller, or the ZAC. This isn't going to be a full in-depth comparison, but just something to keep in mind. It's important to know how these controllers are similar, but then how drastically different they are. The Access controller comes with many more buttons. It seems like it's trying to be almost an all-in-one device with the option to add some additional accessories, while with the ZAC, it's definitely clear that they just want you to be able to plug in anything you want and just get the full customization experience. And neither are bad approaches, in my opinion. I think they're just different use cases. But one thing I will say about the Access controller is that, yes, there are many buttons, but there are not as many buttons as there are on a regular DualSense. On a DualSense, there are, I believe, 19 buttons related to gameplay that you can use, while on the Access controller, there are only 10. One thing regarding the amount of buttons on the DualSense controller, I included touch swipes, so up, down, left, and right in that 19. If you remove that, there'd be 15 buttons. And so this begs the question, well, you may have to buy peripherals for this anyway, because if you've noticed or not, during my Last of Us footage, I wasn't able to turn left or right because I didn't have room for additional assignments. There was no way. I could use a DualSense controller to turn left and right. And in fact, this is what I did in the second clip of me playing Last of Us, but it was a little awkward. So yeah, you may need to somehow get another joystick plugged into your controller for the most optimal experience. Now, there are a couple, I wouldn't say major, but pretty big flaws or shortcomings in this controller that I do need to highlight. First being that there is no option on the controller for a mute button, to assign mute to a button. And the reason is because there is also no headphone jack in the controller. Even though the 3.5 jacks are quote unquote headphone jacks, they do not act as headphone jacks, which I have different thoughts on that, because I think it would be great to have it in the controller itself. But at the same time, again, every PlayStation comes with a DualSense controller, and that's what I did. Just plug my headphones into the DualSense controller and everything worked fine. However, it is worth noting that the ZAC does have a headphone jack. Next, the Access controller also does not have any USB ports besides the USB-C port. I don't know if any peripherals can plug into the USB-C port. I don't have any to test, but I do know that the ZAC does have USB ports. And that could be important for some, because there are some accessories or peripherals that only come in USB form. Lastly, I've seen some people online saying that they wish this controller had haptics, and I generally agree, but again, you have the DualSense, so you can get the haptics through there, if not awkwardly, I would say. But it does make you wonder if this was an intentional decision, because the ZAC also does not have haptics. And I do wonder if they excluded that for people with like nerve damage or different disabilities where that may actually be painful. But again, you could always just turn them off. So I don't know why it's not in the controller. It seems like it'd be big enough to house some sort of haptics or at least vibration, but what do I know? But that just about wraps up my review of the PlayStation Access controller. Overall, if I had to give it a score, 0 out of 10, I would say, honestly, 9 out of 10. Because look, it can't connect to Apple devices, or I didn't test Android at the moment, but that's something that they can update, and that just will expand the different devices that you can use it on. I think it's a great first effort of PlayStation with this controller, and the shortcomings it does have can be mitigated in many different ways, and may not even be shortcomings for some people. So overall, yeah, 9 out of 10 I feel is really appropriate. The PlayStation Access controller releases December 6th, so 2 days after this video goes up. So be sure to grab one if you guys want to, because I definitely think it is worth the investment, especially since it's only $90. Like that's a steal in terms of adaptive equipment. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this review. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you guys thought. If you have any more feedback or thoughts, let me know. But with that being said, I will catch you all next time, and thanks for watching.